Hey guys, what is up? Super K-Man Rocks here, and we are here for my LPL Regional Qualifier Finals overview and analysis video. It's the final series here in the LPL season in 2025. We have our final team qualifying for the World Championships coming out of this, and we're going to be wrapping up everything. When it comes to the LPL, by the end of this video, we're going to know our final team even invited to ASI if we really want to talk about that, but really the big prize is who is going to get that fourth and final seed to go to Worlds and get their date with Destiny with T1 in the play-in stage. I'm excited. I hope you guys are as well. If you are, let me know down in the comments section below. What did you expect from this series? Did it live up to your expectations, or were you perhaps a little bit surprised by the outcome? I'll kind of give my thoughts and opinions on what I expected and, how that ended up going as we go throughout this entire series, but always curious to know where you guys end up landing. Quickly, just very much a thank you to everybody who's been watching the LPL content over this year. It's been a truly unreal kind of year for me when it comes to the LPL, not only being able to make content like I normally do on this channel, but of course being on the LPL English broadcast. I got to be on the desk for this final series, having the opportunity to be on the desk not only for series like this and the JDG Weibo one yesterday, but also, for the grand finals. It's just been a ridiculous year in terms of how things have gone, and so I just want to thank you guys because your views on this channel, that's why it's capable of happening in the first place. Like you guys, offering the opportunity for me to get noticed and go out there and, do my thing. That is the reason that I'm in the position I'm in. So just wanted to give a quick thank you, and I hope I can wrap up the LPL in style. Let's go ahead and get into it. If you are new here, what we're going to do is go game by game, breaking down everything you need to know between these two teams, the advantages, the disadvantages, everything that happened in these games. I'll be giving a player of the game and a dud of the game for each individual game that we cover, and at the end of the series, I will be giving a player of the series to tie everything into a nice, neat little bow. There is nothing to preview, nothing to talk about. We'll look at the four teams that are going to Worlds, of course, after this, and maybe talk a little bit about ASI and the potential teams that are going there from the LPL. But for the most part, this is it, the final domestic series of 2025. So let's get into it. It is, of course, a matchup between the number, I guess, 4 seeded, if you technically want to call it that, the number 4 seeded Invictus Gaming and the number 5 seeded JD Gaming. And both of these teams coming from very different places. I think they kind of have opposite trajectories, opposite arcs throughout a lot of this year, where JDG started off really hot, really fast. I think at the beginning of the year, they were top 3 in upper bracket finals in the winter split, in split number 1, and then they were a top 3 seed going into the playoffs in the spring split as well, and then they just really underperformed there, end up being one of the first teams eliminated from the bracket entirely, not just, as an upper bracket team, but going down to lower bracket and losing in round number 1 as well. It certainly was not a good look for them. They never really found their footing in summer until they got to the playoffs, where things actually did start to click. They ended up overcoming Weibo Gaming, getting themselves into top 4 and getting themselves the 5th seed here. Side selection for that previous series where they were able to take down Weibo, be the better team, and get themselves into this spot. But for Invictus on the other side, it's basically the complete opposite story, where you're looking at a team that did struggle out of the gate, weren't necessarily quite as dominant as maybe you would want them to be, got a bit unlucky in terms of some of the teams that they ran into early on in the year, and it really didn't kind of come alive, I would say, until the spring split playoffs, where they come in as the number 5 seed, and people are kind of looking at them a little bit outside of the big 4, which JDG was a part of at the time, but they end up going on a run, getting some favorable matchups, and getting top 3 in that split, really becoming kind of a threat, and then getting a top 2 seed in the summer split regular season before then collapsing in the summer playoffs, not being able to overcome some of the best teams in the league. I'm not going to put that too much against them right now. Their only real crime is not being better than the 3 teams that have already qualified for the World Championships, losing to BLG in upper bracket, losing to AL in lower bracket, and of course losing to Top Esports in that 3rd seed qualifying match that we just had in the regional qualifiers. Those are the teams that have consistently been able to beat IG, but those are the 3 best teams in the LPL, and so there is a lot of hope, I think, in this matchup that IG should be able to bounce back. The problem is, I actually do think that there is a bit of a mental problem here for some players on IG. I think you look at someone like Rookie, who has not been to Worlds since 2019, as a reminder, and honestly, when you look back at his history of trying to qualify through the regional qualifier, has he had great teams? No, not all the time. You look at that Victory 5 roster, or that Ninjas in Pajamas roster, hell, even that Top esports roster at times, and it's not perfect, but you go back and watch those series in general, and honestly, Rookie is one of the worst players on the Rift towards the end of the year, and it's been very clear to me that the closer you get to Worlds and the closer it gets to becoming a massive series, the worse Rookie has performed, at least over the past 3 to 4 years in particular. That needs to change in this series if this team wants a chance. Him and the Shy were the biggest reason why this team was successful in the regular season. I love Gala and Mako, and I think that they are, rather good, and you would have to hope they're going to do better than they did against top esports. And while I'm not a big fan of Wei, hopefully he can stabilize and just be that facilitator, but it's really going to come down to whether or not these solo laners can step up and perform up to their own expectations. For JDG, on the other side though, it's kind of a similar story, but in a bit of a different way. You are looking at some star players with big names that want to get back to Worlds, but it's players like Scout and Pays who are coming at this from very, very different angles. You have a player in Pays who's tried his best to carry JDG throughout basically all of this year. He still has performed like one of the best ADCs in the world, and I think all he's done is kind of solidify the fact that he was not, enhanced by Gen.G. That team didn't create his career. Getting to play with Chovy and Canyon was not the only reason that Pays was good. Now he's basically in the opposite situation where he is the only player who has consistently been able to carry games for this team, but that's where Scout comes in. If he can be what he was in the series against Weibo, where he was getting leads early, where he was decently consistent in team fights, even if he wasn't perfect, he was okay enough to be able to allow them to win games, that's a completely different version of Scout and of JDG than what we saw in the regular season. And the big question there is, how do these, I don't want to say rookies because they're not rookies, both of these players have been playing for such a long time, but how do these inexperienced players in the top and support positions end up performing now that they are one series away from the World Championships? Xiaoshu and Zhuo both came from Group Nirvana teams in the middle of the year at the start of the summer split to kind of stabilize this team, and now they have a chance to end up pushing on to the World Championships. Are they going to be quality enough to step up and actually make it worthwhile? I favor JDG in a couple of key areas. I think they have the better jungler, and I think they have the better AD carry in this series, but I think IG is better in the top lane and in the support position. Whichever one of these mid laners ends up showing up on the day, I think is going to make a gigantic difference with how this series ends up developing, and I, for one, cannot wait to see it. My prediction in this series was JDG 3-2, but as I stated in my video yesterday, I think this is the closest best of 5 that I've had to preview throughout all of the playoffs. I felt pretty confident, whether right or wrong, about my prediction for a lot of the other series in the playoffs and in the regional qualifiers. This is the one where, vibes-wise, it's just really hard to pinpoint down where things are going. If IG can step up, if you get good performances out of those players, they should be better, but man, there's just something in the back of my head that tells me that it's not going to happen, that JDG is going to be that random 4th seed to get trounced by T1 in the play-in stage. We'll see if I'm right, or we'll see if I'm wrong, and the only way to know is, of course, to go game by game, and that means starting with game number 1. So let's get into it. The winner of game number 1 was JD Gaming. They are going to take game number 1. They're going to go up in this series 1-0. And they do so in incredibly dominant fashion. I mean, this was just a rout in terms of how this game went. There was no moment, no point where IG really felt like they were in it at all. Both of these teams kind of indexing into the part of the game that I think they are the most comfortable in, but JDG just getting way too many power picks on red side to feel like it is justifiable. Not only are you giving over Pantheon on R1, which is already a bit of a problem, you're giving over Nico along with it as well, and of course the Corki as the byproduct here on R2. You're giving over Rumble in the second rotation of this draft phase. It's just so much combat strength coming in from JDG, and so many playmaking tools coming in from them as well. Of course, Pantheon can create so much in the early game, but you have a Nico as well to go ahead and try and perfect those dives. IG is invested fully into scaling. They have no early game to speak of. You're looking at Ornn and Orianna as your 2 solo laners. Neither of them are going to be able to generate leads on their own, and Trundle doesn't have the priority to be able to create for the Sivir, who might have pushed down on the bot side. This is a very difficult game to play out for IG because they have no agency and how things end up going, and JDG took full advantage of that. The moment that things start going awry at the grub fight, all of a sudden things just become nightmarish for IG, and they're never really able to recover. So let's go ahead and talk about it. For me, Xiaoshu is going to get player of the game on the top side. He was very clearly the best player in game number 1. The only other player I considered here was Zhuo on the Nico. I think they were the 2 that ended up really separating JDG. Not that everybody didn't play well. There was only 1 death on JDG throughout the entirety of this game, but I think they were the ones that were playmaking and following up on the playmaking. Zhuo had some fantastic flash ultimates, a really crucial one on the top side of the map around Otacon that basically won JDG the game. From that moment onwards, it was unplayable, even more so than normal for IG, but it was Xiaoshu's damage that I think really ended up being the biggest issue that IG really had no way to overcome. This is what we needed to see. The new players on this team, the players that were brought in to stabilize, actually stepping up and being consistent for this roster. They have not been all that consistent throughout their big playoff run. I think Zhuo was not very good at all against Weibo Gaming, and I think he wasn't particularly good in their playoff run either. I've liked Zhuo mostly because I think Pays is just playing better with him than he ever did with Wink, and whatever gets Pays to play well, I think is what JDG needs right now. But his individual play has really not been great throughout basically his entire career. He needs to step up, and this was a really good showcase that it, at the very least, is possible here. And while Xiaoshu has been praised accordingly, you know, as one of the better top laners in the league, it's mostly because a lot of the other top laners just aren't as consistent as he is in the laning phase. He's not really been all that good at capitalizing in the mid and late game in terms of translating those leads. Now, I do think this is the best split of his entire career, and we've been waiting for a breakout like this, but, you know, if he's going to step up and be better than the Shy, that's IG's win condition. When you look at the all-pro voting for this Invictus gaming team, you see the Shy and Rookie as the ones getting a lot of the votes from a lot of the people, both on LPL English and on the official LPL broadcast. So, actually insane to me that Xiaoshu and Zhuo are the players to step up in game one, but you got to be excited about it. Shun, Scout, Pays were all solid as well. Not really a lot of criticism to give them. I think Scout actually had a really good game on the Aurora, and he's going to need to continue to do that. I talked about mid lane being the most important role in this series, and I firmly believe that. But for Invictus on the other side, this is quite a bad loss, not only because it's game number one and you want to be able to control side select because you are the team going into this series with that blue side select, but because no one really played well. Like, everyone really underperformed. I think the only player that I can say wasn't absolutely atrocious is probably Wei on the Trundle. I don't think he did anything egregiously wrong. I think for the most part, he just wasn't able to play the game because everybody else was losing. But I think the Shy had a really bad game on the Ornn, never really got to function because he drafted himself into a bad laning phase and then never really got to execute on it. And I think Rookie, Gala, and Mako were all in the running for dead of the game for me. It's really just about who you want to give it to. I think Gala's positioning in this game was quite bad, but, you know, I don't really want to blame him all that much. This is basically impossible for Sivir to play, even if I think he put himself in bad positions. Anyways, it was between Rookie and Mako in terms of my decision-making process. I leaned towards Mako, mostly because I think a lot of the big plays that you can count against Rookie, namely the gigantic whiffed shockwave at the beginning of the game where the ball was on Alistar, I kind of go back and watch that, you know, fight again and watch the game again, and I go, man, Mako is flashing out with Orianna ball on top of him. That's kind of Mako's fault and not Rookie's. And so I am giving it to Mako. Not being involved in a single positive play throughout this game is never ideal. He's the only player on IG to not be involved in their one kill throughout this game. But even outside of that, again, I think just not having the wherewithal to understand exactly where he needs to be to try and turn the game around. Him and Rookie, I think, had negative chemistry in this game, and it really came back to bite them. But Rookie playing his most play, or I guess his second most played champion throughout this split in the Orianna, only behind the Annie, one of the two champions he's actually found success on regularly in that Annie and Orianna combo, and losing on it and looking terrible on it is a very, very bad sign for IG. They need to turn things around quickly because being down 1-0 to a team like JDG is not good, and I think this is where the stylistic worries about this matchup end up coming into full effect, because IG is a late game team. They have consistently lost in the early game throughout all of this year, even when they've been able to win games and, you know, be near the top of the standings in the regular season. It's not because they're generating early leads. JDG is genuinely good in the early game. Shun has always been a very good early game jungler, and these guys have hands, they just don't really have a brain. So if you're giving them these gigantic gold leads by drafting Orianna, Sivir, Ornn, it's basically a free reign for JDG to just control the map and kind of get rid of their weakest part. IG really need to start investing into at least trying to contest JDG in the early game. If they don't, I think it's going to be a pretty big problem for them. But are they going to be able to bounce back and tie up the series, because they really need to do that if they want to stay alive here? Or is JDG going to take a dominant 2-0 series lead? Well, the winner of game number 2 was Invictus Gaming. They are going to take game number 2. They are going to even up the series at 1 apiece. And thank goodness we have a series on our hands here. If JDG went up 2-0 here, it would have been pretty disastrous. But you know what? They should have gone up 2-0 here. There is no justification for Invictus being able to walk out of this game with a win other than them having the best player on the Rift. Pure and simple, Gala was incredible in game number 2, and he might have just saved the entire year for Invictus with this game alone. There are obviously other pieces that I think you could talk about. Mako had a great game on the Renata. I think that there were some moments where it felt like the Shy Wei and Rookie were doing okay, but really at the end of the day, this was Gala's game to win or lose, and luckily for IG, he decided to win it. He was better than his, compatriot on the other side, his role buddy on the other side in Pays, and he ends up getting himself back into this series and getting his entire team back into this series with the performance that he gave, because this is not a favorable game state for IG really under any circumstance. Look at this draft for IG. They're almost over-indexing into what we were talking about in the previous draft, where they drafted all scaling. They drafted like Orianna and Ornn and Sivir, and they didn't really have any way to actually control tempo of the game. Well, here is Annie, Kalista, Vi. Like, if this team is not super far ahead by 10 minutes, it feels like it's really difficult to play this out against Neferi and Ryze, who are pretty much always going to have tempo on the map, and then Ziggs can just take any tower in the game as long as you play safe enough and slow enough. This is a comp that really thrives on being able to control a lot of the map state, and so for Invictus, when they started to lose early, when things really went awry for them in terms of some of the early game plays, I thought it was over. I genuinely thought this series was kind of cooked. We were talking on the desk as we were watching the game about how it's kind of not good for Invictus. Like, you can't be down 2-0, but leave it to Gala to get a lot of gold on some bounce back plays, some really aggressive dives that end up costing IG a lot, that end up coming back to really pay it off, because you get this Kalista some gold and she can take over a very defensive build coming in from Gala, but more than enough to be able to solo basically everybody on the side of JDG and live to tell the tale sometimes. The bailout obviously coming in really clutch in a couple of instances, but if you couldn't tell, Gala's player of the game. I mean, he genuinely 1v9'd in terms of how this game went. I don't use that term lightly. I think this was maybe not a 1v9, maybe a 2v8, because again, Mako I thought was fine on the Renata, but I sometimes go, oh, he 1v9'd or he 2v8'd, and it's, a player playing above the standing of the rest of the team. The rest of the team would have lost the game, but he ended up winning it. This is genuinely like IG trying to lose the game. Players like Rookie and Wei just playing terrible at the end of this in terms of their engages and their timers and just when they wanted to try and find those pathways, and Gala winning anyways. Like, genuinely just not caring that his team was actively running it down. And for JDG, this has to feel terrible. You had a mega fed Neferi on Shun on the other side of this. You drafted something like Scout's Rise, which he's been mostly effective on, not necessarily always effective on. You took the Scion away from the Shy and got to play into a relatively neutral matchup, and then Xiaoshu went even in lane, which is nightmarish for the Aatrox in terms of how this ends up breaking down. Like, this should have been a free win for JDG. They just couldn't execute, mostly because their AD carry wasn't as good as the enemy AD carry. So I guess we can talk about it, but basically I've already gone over every major thing. Gala was sensational. He was diving in and ducking around, trying to dodge as much as he could in terms of the damage coming in, but that's why you build Jack Show. That's why you build Guardian Angel, so you can play super aggressive on the Kalista and still be able to have a lot of those offensive tools because of how naturally it's already built in to the Kalista kit. So Gala, again, really saving his team. I cannot stress enough. I think if they lose this game, there is a very real shot that their year is just over. It's so hard to come back from 2-0 and reverse sweep anybody in Fearless, but let alone a team that kind of has your number in terms of how things have gone. I think if the mental had been where it was for IG losing this game, it could have been disastrous, and Gala says, nope, we are going to stay alive, and he deserves all the credit for that. But I'm actually doing the rare thing, and I'm giving dud of the game, I should say, to a player on the winning side, because to me, dud of the game is Rookie. He is not showing up here today. He was bad in game number 1 on the Orianna, ends up completely whiffing that shockwave, even though I do kind of blame Mako for that as well. And then in game number 2 here, he almost cost the entire game by getting caught on vision as the Annie twice. Not one. I mean, once is very obvious, right? Scout ends up flashing over the blue buff wall in the I believe, 3rd dragon fight, I want to say. Maybe it was the 4th dragon fight. One of those, and ends up just killing Rookie, and the game is basically in a really bad spot from there because Wei tries to turn things around by diving in. Gala is able to pull back some gold, but it's not nearly enough to make it anything other than a massive win for JDG that they're able to use to kind of get the Otacon and start to snowball things. But I think even more than that, his positioning in the team fights that actually did go well was also quite bad. Like, I just do not think he was good in this game. And let me remind you, Orianna and Annie are the 2 champions he's played the most and has had the most success on by far throughout 2025 summer. So if these are the champions like that he's supposed to do well on, and now both of them are out of the way and he had bad games on both, I am quite concerned for Rookie looking at how this series is moving forward. He's just not playing well. Once again, getting to the finals of the regional qualifier and not getting a good performance out of Rookie. The the former world champion. It has to start happening sooner rather than later. Luckily, they were able to get out of this because of Gala, but certainly no thanks to Rookie, who is running it right now in the mid lane. I think Wei had another bad game. Shun has just completely outplayed him in the jungle so far through the first 2 games in terms of generating resources. He's just, again, bailed out by his bot lane being good. The Shao was fine on the Aatrox, had a couple of bad plays, had a couple of good plays. I'm not going to sit here and say that he was useless or anything like that. I think jungle mid is a much bigger problem right now for Invictus, but it certainly wasn't a clean win. They're so fortunate to be able to walk out of this. And for JDG, this has to feel absolutely terrible. How do you lose this game? Genuinely, like, how is it possible that you go into this and lose this game? This should be unlosable for this team, and yet they found a way to get themselves into as bad of a spot as possible. Shun was super fed on the Neferi, and you have so many playmaking tools. I genuinely think if you just play a little bit slower, like a tad bit slower, and just, you know, have the Scion and the Rakan and even the Ryze at times, like, zone off the enemy team so that Ziggs can just take towers over and over again, this game is over. But instead, you're realm warping the Scion into the backline on the bot side play and just kind of going for 2v2 trades. And it's just, it's too much. It's too fast. And that's JDG's thing, right? Is their creativity and their aggression oftentimes is valuable for them, because usually any play, even if it's not a great one, is better than no play. But in this game, certainly taking it slower probably results in a win. I think they just were over eager and way too aggressive, and it cost them absolutely everything. I think Pays had a terrible game on the Ziggs in terms of the team fights. He did not feel comfortable on the champion. You know, there's a lot of conversation about why are you putting your best player on something like Ziggs, but this guy was very good on Ziggs last year. For that Gen G team, obviously different scenario. You no longer have Canyon and Chovy to be able to pick up the slack if you're not the main carry, but it's not like it's a champion he's not had a ton of success on, but it certainly didn't feel like he had a lot of success or was very comfortable on the Ziggs here in game number 2. I think that there were some problems with Scout in terms of his positioning in late game fights. I don't think he was the problem, though. Generally, I think this was a good Ryze game. It was a fine enough Scion game. It was a fine enough Rakan game. I think that there were some great knockups coming in from Joao. I honestly just think JDG played it wrong. They had the tools to be able to win this game, and they just did not utilize those tools correctly, and it cost them game number 2, and it very well could cost them all the momentum they had generated in this series. They should be up 2-0. Now it's tied 1 apiece, and if you go into game number 3 and lose out to IG now, things get very, very dicey. You cannot lose this game number 3 after how game number 2 ended, but IG have been given a second chance to get themselves back into this series. Are they going to take it and take the lead for the first time here in game number 3? The most important game of the series, and perhaps the most important game of the year here in the LPL for both of these teams. Who's going to take it? Well, the winner of game number 3 was Invictus Gaming. They are going to take game number 3. They're going to go up for the first time in this series 2-1, and they are 1 game away now from realizing the dream and the potential of finally getting back to the World Championships, the place that they have so desperately tried to get to, not only this year, but over the past couple of years. You know, with some of those young rosters, they've been kind of a budget organization. It's all been leading up to this moment where, you know, they need to try and qualify, and they are now as close as you can possibly get, 1 game away from getting that number 4 seed. And for JDG, this is the worst game they've played all series long up until this point. And right now, it just does not feel like they have the sauce. It does not feel like they have the gameplay to be able to overcome a team like Invictus. We can't be particularly surprised by that being the outcome, but it's certainly not, you know, an ideal set of circumstances, I think, for a lot of people who kind of really had a lot of faith in a couple of players on JDG that are just not performing well in this series. Most notably Pays, who we will get into. This is the weakest best of 5 I think he has played in quite a long time, and it's a really, really bad time for him to do so. So let's go ahead and get into it. Player of the game for me, once again, is going to go to Gala in the bot lane. I know Broadcast ended up giving this to Wei on the Jarvan. I think Gala was better in this game than the Jarvan was, or at least more relevant than the Jarvan was. I think the damage coming out from Kai'Sa was just unreal, and this guy's positioning is so aggressive, and it's often just perfect in terms of the way that he needs to play out these fights. The trade here was that they left up the Kiana on B1, which is something you should basically never be giving over to blue side at any point on this patch, and, you know, in return, they were able to grab the Kai'Sa and the Jarvan for that consistent dive setup, and they made the most of it. I think what we've learned here today is that there is no power pick that is powerful enough to not justify Gala playing Kai'Sa, because he's just too ridiculously good at this champion. Again, credit to him. I think he ended up playing this just about as well as you can, and that's 2 games in a row now where Gala has really been the one that's pushing Invictus forward. For all of those people out there that think Gala's not clutch, or that he's not good enough to be a player that can really push a team on to the World Championships or anything like that, I hope that this is one of those games and one of those series that is starting to kind of change your mind, because in the biggest of moments, he is the one that is stepping up for this team and actively getting them closer and closer to Worlds. But I do want to give a lot of credit to the enablers on this team as well. Wei and Mako, I think, did a great job of making sure that Gala was in as good of a position as possible to be able to take this game. I think Wei did have some fantastic engages, especially as this game continued to go along. I still don't really like his early games. I think his early games are just generally bad. They were bad on BLG. They were bad, forever on RNG. Like, it just kind of is what it is. Wei is not a good early game jungler. He will never be a good early game jungler. But if you can get him into a position where he does have a fed Kai'Sa, and all of a sudden you have a Swain that's basically unkillable coming out of the mid lane as well, Jarvan can just dive in without really a lot of worry and thought, and all of a sudden, as an enabler, he can start to look a lot more efficient. I think this is the right role for Wei on this team, is hope and pray that you can get your laners ahead. It's not the most consistent strategy in the world, but Wei at the very least capitalized in this game in particular. Mako as well, on the rel. I think this is the second game in a row where he was just really strong. And I think in this game in particular, the engages were looking really consistent. It's kind of tough to find angles on the rel in the way that JDG is set up. I think that's fair to say. Picks like Tristana and Galio, like, you don't necessarily want to dive on them if you're the rel, because it can be difficult not only to lock them down because Paze has the buffer, but for Galio, it's like, why would you even want to lock them down? And Kiana, it's good luck getting on the Kiana, but Mako still made the most of it, didn't end up dying at all in this game, and did actually have a couple of really great, impactful ultimates throughout this one. And I think the peel for Gala is really something that's going to go a bit under the radar in terms of where he was looking for a lot of his engages. Rookie was fine enough, ends up going deathless mostly because of the champion. At least he's able to play something that's not Orianna and Annie. His best game of the series somehow comes on Swain in game number 3. Kind of insane. And then we have to talk about the Shy a little bit. This guy gets camped into oblivion as this game ends up starting, ends up like 0-5 or something like that at the start of this game, and looks like he is completely out of it on the Jace. It actually does feel like Xiaoshu is going to be in a phenomenal spot on this Renekton to kind of take over and get onto Kai'Sa in the backline, burn a lot of those summoners to allow Kiana to start taking over these fights. But the reality of the situation is that it's Jace at the midpoint in the game, no matter what. It doesn't matter that he's 0-5. It doesn't matter that he's gotten solo killed twice in this game. He's going to have a lot of damage, and he actually ends up with most damage in the entire game as this ends up ending 4-7. Pretty respectable scoreline considering how everything ended up starting, and he was really crucial in some of these late game team fights in terms of what he was putting out damage-wise. So IG just kind of across the board playing really well, and definitely their best played and best performed game of the entire series. Could not have come at a better time here in game number 3. And for JDG on the other side, like, the real conversation and the topic of discussion, I think, surrounding JDG coming out of game 3 is, can Paze step up? This guy's going to get done of the game for game 3. He was not good enough on the Ziggs in game number 2, took himself off of one of those, like, one crazy, like, aggressive picks, something that can actually carry, and then got back onto that in game number 3, played the Tristana, has a comp that's basically built around making sure she can play and get those resets with the Kiana and the Renekton to be able to set that up, and he just plays bad. Like, there's nothing else to say. His positioning in these fights was terrible. He had the worst flash I've ever seen in one of these fights. Like, it just does not seem like he is on his A game today, and this is a terrible, terrible, terrible time for him to not be on his A game, considering just how important this series is for JDG. He absolutely has to step up in game number 4, and specifically, he has to play better than he did in games 2 and 3 and be a more important and, I guess, centralizing player than he was in the last 2 games if this team wants any chance of being able to come back in this series after what looked like such a great start for him and for the team. I think there is some blame to go around as well. I think Scout was generally kind of useless in this game. Some of the Galio taunts were very good, but for the most part, I think a lot of the aggressive plays were kind of falling elsewhere. Shun ends up really screwing over the Otacon fight that Zhuo kind of ends up bailing out with the Summoner Spellbook Spite to actually steal away the Otacon, but Shun chasing down the Shy, who's 0-5 at this point, ends up ulting him with 0 HP left to take the kill away, and all of a sudden you have no ult to actually try and contest around this Otacon, and you immediately lose the fight. You go for it anyways, and you lose the game on the spot. Pretty terrible play there from Shun that ends up going pretty catastrophically wrong. Like I said, Zhuo ends up stealing the Otacon. Outside of that, Leona didn't do anything in this game. And then Xiaoshu actually played really well. His 2 kills were both solo kills onto the Shy in the early part of this game. It's just really tough for the Renekton to get going the moment the Kai'Sa starts getting out of control and Swain starts getting a little bit of damage. And so it just kind of put them in a bad spot. JDG feel like they're not investing correctly into the players that are playing well, but I don't blame them because Shun and Paze, they're supposed to be the players that are carrying. Shun has stepped up to the plate here today. I would even argue that at times he's been the better jungler. For the most part, he has been the better jungler in this series, but Paze has not been good enough, and that has to change going into game number 4. If it doesn't, this could be IG in 4, and we will see, because they have the opportunity now to go to the World Championships. If they can win this next game, they are there. JDG want to keep their hopes alive, though, and send us to a Silver Scrapes game number 5. Are they going to be able to do it? Well, the winner of game number 4 was Invictus Gaming. They are going to take game number 4. They are going to take this series 3-1. And your 4th seed at the World Championships for 2025 from the LPL will be Invictus Gaming. This org, this team has tried so hard to get back to the promised land that they have not been able to reach in many, many years. It's not just the players on this team that have struggled to get back to Worlds. It's this organization. They've gone through period after period where it's budget roster after budget roster. They've been able to find some hidden gems, some players that have been able to break out and make their names elsewhere, like Zika and like Shun on the other side of this matchup that end up, going on to do good things elsewhere. Even someone like an On, Wink. There are players that have come through this Invictus system that have found success, but it's not been with Invictus. This team has consistently been near the middle to bottom of the standings ever since their golden era of winning Worlds, and now bringing back the players that got them to prominence in the first place, the Shy, Rookie, bringing in, legends of the game and legends of the LPL like Mako, like Gala, that have, consistently been able to win at this level. Even someone like Wei, who has obviously found a ton of success. They finally are able to get back to the World Championships after so many long years. And for JD Gaming, unfortunately, it's the same story as last year. In fact, it's probably a little bit worse. At least last year, you went to 5 games against Weibo. You couldn't even get to game 5 here against Invictus, but the story is being told. JDG for 2 years in a row now gets 1 series away from making the World Championships and just can't quite close it down. An org that had found so much success in the early 20s is just not been able to keep that going. And obviously, there's a lot to talk about, a lot to break down in terms of how this game went, but really this was kind of a parallel to game number 1, just in the opposite direction. Game number 1 was a dominant JDG win where they were capable of running the entire game. That's what Invictus had here. Shun ends up with the worst level 1 you can possibly have, going for the delayed invade to try and disrupt the Zyra clear, only to get chunked out by Electrocute Zyra and lose basically his entire health bar. His clear is completely unsustainable, and he ends up getting forced out of his own jungle as he continues to play. From that point onwards, the Wukong is completely behind in tempo, and the Zyra controls everything throughout the rest of the game. You've already got the Taliyah in the mid lane that I think is so strong. You've got the Varus that I think is so strong. A lot of these champions that people are much lower on because they've been nerfed, but still have a ton of positives going for them, were picked here by IG, and they make it work out. Player of the game, though, kind of has to go to Wei in the jungle, doesn't it? Like, he was the most relevant player in this game. The Zyra space control was massive in this game. How do you even play if you're Lucian, or if you're Lissandra, or if you're Wukong? How do you step up and actually create anything for this if you're JDG, if you're behind? I actually like JDG's draft if they don't run down the level 1 that they ended up having, but Zyra's space control alongside things like Taliyah ends up becoming way too much to bear, and there's no easy way to actually facilitate any sort of fights coming in from JDG, and that's where Wei ended up being an absolutely monstrous player here. What a big time for him to have one of his better games. I will say most of it was probably the champion, less so the player, but still, if the champion is the thing that pops off, the person piloting it still deserves a lot of the credit. So credit to Wei, best game of the series in my opinion here on the Zyra, but player of the series as a whole, come on, man, it's obviously Gala. This guy was unreal here today. This was genuinely a legacy type of series from Gala, very similar to how we've talked about somebody like Light over the past couple of years, stepping up in the regional qualifiers and getting his team to Worlds. That's exactly what Gala did here today. The legacy of an AD carry being incredible in the final series of the LPL year lives on with Gala popping off. You could easily justify him being player of the game. His positioning, his kiting, his ability to play front to back team fights on this Varus, it was just sensational. He even picked up a steal in this game objective-wise. I've compared Gala to Gumayushi for years on this channel. I actually genuinely believe they're the same player in terms of how they play. Maybe Gala is like 95% of Gumayushi. Maybe he's a little bit worse, but like Gala's, basically what Gumayushi is, and he, kind of solidified that with the Varus game here in game number 4. Just happy to see this guy finally start to get some credit. I was much higher on his split number 2 than anybody else was, and everybody kind of came around in split 3, but this guy's been great all year long for this team, and he really got them to Worlds. I cannot stress enough how important that game number 2 was from him. If he doesn't play like that on the Callista, this team is likely not going to the World Championships. That was the difference maker, and Gala is player of the series for it. Mako ended up playing well outside of game number 1. Rookie ends up going back to the World Championships alongside Invictus. Him and Invictus have both not been able to make Worlds since 2019, I believe, unless there's something just crazy that I'm forgetting about, but I'm pretty sure that that is the case, and these two being able to reunite and get themselves back to the top of, the global standing, even if it's not number 1 in the LPL, is such a great story. Rookie wasn't perfect in this series, but he certainly was good enough, and games 3 and 4 were some of his better games of, the last couple of weeks, and that's really, exciting to see. We'll talk a bit more about the matchup as we get towards the end of this video against T1, but, whatever happens now, Rookie gets a best of 5, finally, against Faker. That's never happened before, and again, we'll talk about that a bit more. Not even in the LCK, when they were both there, they never played a best of 5 against against each other. They have one best of 3, never played against each other internationally either. Just excited for that. The Shy gets back to Worlds. He comes out of like pseudo-retirement to get this team back to Worlds. He wasn't perfect throughout this year, but he was the first team All-Pro top laner in split number 3 for a reason. When this guy is locked in and when he is popping off, he can still be one of the most dangerous players on the Rift. I'm just so happy for IG. They have more than earned it, and I'm excited to see what they can do now. And then for JDG, it's a sad way to go out, but quite frankly, I would have felt pretty bad if this team had made the World Championships, if Xiaoshu and Zhuo had ended up being Worlds caliber players coming out of the LPL. I think this is probably the better outcome for a team like JDG to kind of understand exactly where their strengths and flaws are. I fear that this org might have convinced themselves to run with a similar roster going into 2026 had they actually won this series and gone as the 4th seed to Worlds despite going up against T1, but there are a lot of things to criticize. Paze simply was just not good enough in this series. Games 2, 3, and 4, all 3 of their losses, Paze was completely outplayed by Gala, and quite frankly was just not good. It's not even that he was the worst AD carry, because sometimes you can be the weaker AD carry just because the other AD carry is doing really well, and you're not making mistakes. He was making plenty of mistakes. I can't believe that we have a do-or-die game in game number 4, and we are picking Paze's Lucian after what happened in that previous series. It just felt kind of ridiculous to me on B1. Did not work out here as well. The Lucian just never really got to play the game, and, you know, I think Paze in general was the weakest player on JDG in this series, and when that is the case, this team definitely has no chance of being able to pick up a win. Scout for me is going to get dead of the game for game number 4. On rewatch, man, this guy was useless. There was just nothing that this Lissandra was capable of accomplishing. I end up not really liking this pick. I think that there were other things that they could have gone for here that would have been a bit more effective to play off of the Wukong, but alas, I think Scout actually played fine today. He probably played even better than he did against Weibo Gaming. It was just kind of not meant to be. Shun was excellent throughout this series, except for level 1 here in game number 4. Terrible time for him to make the biggest mistake, but he was better than Wei in this series. I'm pretty confident in saying that. I don't want this series to take anything away from Shun. I think Xiaoshu as well was also really good. He was better than the Shy for basically all of this series. The top side was not the issue for JDG. It was the bot side. Zhuo was just not a Worlds caliber player, and Paze underperformed, and that is enough to knock JDG out. They still have the potential to go to ASI. They're going to get the invite there as the number 5 seed from the LPL. I would be really excited to see this team at that tournament because I think they could make some noise against a lot of the other, 5th, 6th place teams from some of the better regions, like the LCK here, but at the end of the day, JDG aren't good enough to be a Worlds team, and I think that became clearer and clearer as we were watching this series. Invictus is the better team. This org, these players, they finally are able to get back to exactly where they think they should have been all along. The monkey is off of Rookie's back, and he's going to get the chance to prove absolutely everything at Worlds in a best of 5 against T1. Alright, but that is going to do it for my LPL Regional Finals overview and analysis video. And that does it for the domestic LPL year here in 2025. The 4 teams that are going to Worlds to represent the LPL up on your screen now. Billy Gaming, Anyone's Legend, Top Esports, and Invictus Gaming in that order. I'm very excited that the 4 best teams ended up going. I said this on the desk last night for LPL English that, we couldn't have asked for 4 better teams to represent the LPL. I think they are the encapsulation of how this year has gone. You've got this super team that's kind of captured the hearts of everybody with IG, and then the 3 champions that we had in the LPL this year getting automatic bids into the Swiss stage. These are the teams that deserve to be at the tournament, and I'm excited to see what they can do. BLG, AL, Top Esports, of course, automatically seeded into the Swiss stage because they are top 3 seeds. Invictus Gaming, unfortunately, do have the pleasure of facing T1 in a win or go home best of 5 to even get into the tournament. I don't think they're favorites in that series. I'm going to be honest. I think the matchup is quite terrible for them. I think that Rookie versus Faker is not something that I feel particularly great about. And how you beat T1, typically, we've talked about this a lot, is being able to establish pressure early on in games, and especially being able to out-tempo them through jungle. If Owner is off of the 8-ball, if he's kind of behind in the game, it's a lot easier to beat T1. When they get to snowball games, it's really tough, and I can't think of a worse early game team that's going to be at Worlds than maybe Invictus Gaming going into this World Championships. I just don't think it's a great matchup, but hopefully they prove me wrong. I want the LPL to succeed so much, but alas, these are the 4 teams, and all we can do now is say we hope they do well as they go, I guess, stay at home. They don't go anywhere. Worlds is here in Shanghai, so they will get the chance to at least represent their home region at the World Championships. But that's going to do it for me here in this video. I do hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, leave a like. It really does mean a lot to me. It lets me know you guys are enjoying the content, and it does help get this video out to a lot more people, which I'm always very appreciative of. Subscribe. We're not done with, LPL content in general. We're done with domestic content, but Worlds is around the corner, and we're covering all three of the other major regions, so LTA, LEC, and LCK in terms of their playoffs, which are still ongoing on this channel. Hit subscribe, hit that bell. You want to be notified when all of those videos do go live. Again, just thank you so much to anybody who really stuck with the LPL this year, watched me on the channel here or watched me on the broadcast or did both. It really has been an unbelievable year, just all things considered. I'm so fortunate to be able to get to talk about esports like this so regularly, and I hope you guys have enjoyed the content. Again, it's not over. We still got a lot to talk about, but definitely feels like a big ending here for the LPL, so just wanted to say thank you to everybody who's kind of been along for that journey, and a special shout out to Izzy, who continues to kill it with the graphics, not only for me here on the channel and for every video that we cover, but for the LPL English broadcast itself. You might recognize some of the graphics. Izzy, been with the channel for years at this point, since 2022, with me alongside me here on the LPL English broadcast. He has had an unbelievable year, and he's continued to make this channel better and better, and we just a big thanks to everybody who's watched or been involved, and it's just been awesome. But now that I'm done rambling, with all that being said, I hope you all are having a great day. I hope you continue to have a great day, and I will see you all